Welcome to the ultimate underwater smartphone housing comparison. In today's video, we'll look at 3 different underwater smartphone housings. We'll compare them to each another, talk about their main features, pros and cons. And at the end, I'll also let you know which one of these 3 housings is my absolute favorite underwater smartphone housing of all housings available right now on the market. Let's do this. Welcome to the Underwater Filmmaking School. It's great to see all your smiling faces again. On my recent dive trips, I have realized that there is a lot of divers nowadays that use their smartphone to capture their underwater adventures. And that makes total sense to me because the smartphone that we carry with us all the time is probably the most convenient device to take photos and videos underwater. And once we've taken those photos and videos with our smartphone, they are saved right on the smartphone itself. We don't have to transfer them anywhere, and we can use them on our smartphone photo or video roll and distribute them to different social media networks, send them to friends and family, and so on. So it makes total sense that more and more people are getting into that field and getting attracted to using their smartphone to film and take photos underwater. Now, because of that fact, a lot of companies have started producing underwater smartphone housings, and the market has literally been flooded in the past 1.5 to 2 years. So for someone who doesn't really have a lot of experience with underwater smartphone housings, it can be really challenging to find the appropriate underwater smartphone housing for their needs. So in today's video, we'll talk about the 3 most popular underwater smartphone housings that are out on the market right now. We'll talk about their main features, about their pros, their cons, and at the end, I'm also gonna give you a bit of a conclusion and my personal opinion on which out of these 3 smartphone housings I find to be the best housing overall out on the market right now. The 3 smartphone housings that we're gonna be looking at today are, for once, the Sea Life Sport Diver smartphone housing. We're also gonna look at the Dive Fork Sea Touch 4 Max. And last but not least, we're gonna be looking at the Hot Dive H2 Pro underwater smartphone housing. Today's comparison video is going to be divided into 4 different sections. In the first section, we'll talk about the unique main features of each of these housings. Each of them has 1 or more features that are very unique to that type of housing and that is not available on any of the other housings. So we'll spend a little time talking about these first of all. In section number 2, we will then look at the pros, and in section number 3, the cons of each of these housings. Lastly, in section number 4, we will have a bit of a discussion and conclude which housing is best for what, and I will give you a personal recommendation based on my personal experience with each of these housings, which one I think is the best housing out on the market right now at this moment. So let's not waste any more time and let's get right into the first section. So let's look at the Dive Fork Sea Touch 4 Max smartphone housing. Wow, what a name. The main feature of this smartphone housing is that it integrates a fully functional touch screen which works even underwater, and it works very, very well. You can use it with your bare fingers, but you can also use it with gloves or even dry gloves if you're diving in cold conditions and you're using a dry suit for your dives. And at first, this doesn't really sound like a huge deal, but it actually is a really, really big deal because it means that you can access everything on your smartphone like if you were using it just like normal on land. With other smartphone housings, you will have to rely on a third-party app that you have to download first. Then you use that app connecting your smartphone to the housing via Bluetooth to that app, and then use that app to work your camera while being underwater. And in most situations, in most instances, that works just fine. but most of the time you won't be able to use all the functionalities that your smartphone camera offers by using a third-party app. For example, with the iPhones, iPhone 13 Pro and iPhone 14 Pro, they offer a ProRes 422 recording option, which is a very high quality recording codec, giving you a lot of leeway and a lot of room for color correction and color grading in post. Now, you cannot access that recording mode if you're not using the native iPhone camera app, and you can't use that if you don't have a touchscreen, right? So the Divefork C-Touch 4 Max underwater smartphone housing right now is the only housing on the market that allows you to make full use of all the capabilities that your smartphone camera has. And that is, in my opinion, a really big deal and makes this a very unique housing. The second main feature that the Divefork C-Touch 4 Max has is that it can also be used as an external monitor on a, for example, DSLR or mirrorless camera that you're using to film or take photos underwater. Divefork has developed a Wi-Fi transmitter, which is basically a antenna or a cable working as a Wi-Fi antenna that you can place in between your smartphone housing, which has your smartphone inside, and the camera housing. And then it will just transfer the Wi-Fi signal through the water, through that cable from the camera onto your smartphone. And if your smartphone has the capability to work as a monitor for your camera model on land, it will have the same capability underwater as well, and you don't need to buy a expensive, big and chunky external monitor to go along with your camera, but you can use the smartphone as an external monitor for your camera to use when you film and take photos underwater, and that's also very cool. The Sea Life Sport Diver smartphone housing has a main feature which is probably not quite as exciting as the Divefork's main feature, but is very useful nevertheless. It does include a red filter in the standard packaging, which none of the other smartphone housings do. And that means that once you buy that smartphone housing, you don't have to get a red filter separately. You don't have to spend any more money on a red filter. It's right there included in the standard packaging, and you can go off and start taking photos and filming with that housing right away, and you're gonna get some really good results with it. It pops right onto the main lens of the housing, and works very well in tropical water. So this is something that I find very useful, to have that red filter. With all of the other housings, I always recommend to get a red filter anyways. It's just gonna make your imagery, your footage and your photos look so much better having that extra red color in your images. But with the Sea Life Sport Diver smartphone housing, you don't have to spend any extra money to buy that separately. It's already included in the standard packaging and the standard shipping. The Hot Dive H2 Pro has two specific main features that I want to mention here. First of all, it has an integrated LED underwater video light, meaning that you have one LED underwater video light, an 800 lumen video light integrated, built into the smartphone housing already. So you don't necessarily need to get an external underwater video light. That light that is already built into the housing will give you just a little bit extra light into your images and your shots. Secondly, it has a pressure sensor integrated into the housing, and the app has a dive computer app functionality, meaning that you can switch in between taking photos to looking at a dive computer layout. There's also a compass integrated there as well, and the dive computer will tell you everything like temperature, depth, dive time, and so on. I wouldn't probably use this as my main dive computer, but it's something nice, a nice feature to have as a backup computer and also as something to remind you on how deep you are and how long you've been down there while you're taking the photos or the videos. So that can be quite useful, and if this is something that you're looking for, then the Hot Dive H2 Pro might be a good option for you there. The list of pros on the Dive C-Touch 4 Max underwater smartphone housing is quite long. Obviously, the touch screen is one of the biggest pros with this housing, giving you full accessibility of your smartphone and pretty much every function of your smartphone, even while being underwater. And as I mentioned before when we talked about the main features, it works like a charm. It really does. Whether you're using your bare fingers or gloves, you will be able to quite easily use the touch screen on that housing and therefore the functions of your smartphone. Another pro is that it is not smartphone specific, so you can just basically use different inlets like this one's here. So they can be bought separately, and with using these inlets you can adapt the housing to a huge variety of different smartphones that are able to be used with that housing. Which is great, because once you got the housing, if you then upgrade to a newer model smartphone, you don't need to get a new housing, you can just get a new inlet and adjust for the changed form factor of your smartphone housing, still being able to use it with the existing smartphone housing that you have. Also, a big plus is that you're not relying on any third-party apps. You don't have to download anything to make it work with the housing, and I personally find that something very cool. There's a lot of different accessories that come along with the Dive C-Touch 4 Max, starting with red filters, macro lenses, wide-angle conversion lenses. We talked about the Wi-Fi transmitter cable that you can buy separately to use the your smartphone inside the C-Touch housing as an external monitor for a larger camera that you want to use to take photos or film underwater. It is very easy to use, and last but not least, it is very attractively priced at less than $200, $199 for the standard underwater smartphone housing. Obviously, if you then go and get some of the accessories, it's gonna get a little more expensive than that, but you can, if you're on a tight budget, spend less than $200 and you have a really well working underwater smartphone housing. The pros on the Sea Life Sport Diver smartphone housing include the red filter that comes with the standard packaging. Also, this housing is not camera specific, similar to the Dive housing. Here, this housing can also take a variety of different smartphones in different sizes. And again, this means that you're most likely not gonna have to upgrade the housing if you change your smartphone model. You can still keep using the same housing, which is, in my opinion, quite important and something very useful. Now, a pro on this housing is that it does include a vacuum valve or a vacuum system, which basically means that you can use a little vacuum pump to create a vacuum inside the housing, giving you more security that you won't get a leak before you get into the water and while you're underwater. So it gives you a little bit more security for your smartphone, putting your smartphone in there and taking it underwater. Also, it includes a leak detection system, a little alarm system that as soon as it detects some moisture on the sensor that is placed inside the housing, it will sound an alarm and let you know that you have a little bit of moisture in there, which might indicate that there is some water intrusion happening into the housing, giving you a little time to come back up to the surface and just bring your housing and the smartphone to safety. So this is a nice safety feature that this housing has. Also, something that I want to put on the pro side of the Sea Life Sport Diver smartphone underwater housing is its build quality. I think it is built in a very sturdy and good way, giving you plenty of security taking your smartphone underwater in that smartphone housing. Looking at the Hot Dive H2 Pro underwater smartphone housing's pros, we definitely need to mention the integration of a 800 lumen underwater video light that is built right into the housing, as we've mentioned before. Also the possibility of having a dive computer and a compass displayed in the third-party app that you're using with the underwater smartphone housing. Now this housing is also not camera specific or smartphone specific, so it works for a variety of different smartphone models and sizes. It also includes a vacuum system similar to the one that is found in the Sea Life Sport Diver smartphone housing, but with this one here on the hot dive, it actually doesn't require a manual pump to establish the vacuum, but it works fully automatic. You can just press a button and it will actually just suck out some of the air, creating that vacuum inside the housing, and just making the housing ready to use that way, which is quite a convenient way because you don't need to carry around a manual vacuum pump with you anymore. But the downside to this is that it does actually drain the battery that you have to put inside the housing quite a bit if you keep doing this too often. Also, I want to mention that the build quality of the Hot Dive H2 Pro is very good. It makes a very solid and sturdy impression and seems to be able to take quite a bit of a beating. So let's get into the con side of these smartphone housings, and maybe one or two of these negatives might be the little thing that is gonna keep you from buying one or the other of these smartphone housings. Looking at the Dive underwater smartphone housing, the C-Touch 4 Max first. Well, we have to talk about the build quality, and I don't want to say that this is a negative per se, but generally speaking, the Dive C-Touch 4 Max housing is made primarily of plastic. It is high quality plastic, I would say, and it is fairly sturdy and works quite well. I personally have used this housing on, I don't know, 60, 80 dives already myself, and I've never had any issues with it. But you need to keep in mind that it is not made from aluminum like the other housings, and there is a higher potential if you do bang it against something that you're gonna be breaking it a little easier than the other housings. Now the Dive C-Touch 4 Max, the housing doesn't include a vacuum system. And that's just to do with the touchscreen, the soft membrane that it uses to be able to use the touchscreen. With that integration, a vacuum can just simply not be achieved on such a type of housing. At first, I also thought that this was going to be a problem for me and that I was going to feel less secure about putting my smartphone inside such a housing. But as I just said before, I've done 60, 80 dives with it already. I've never had any issues of any leakage or anything on the housing. Just got to be a little careful putting your housing in there, sealing it properly, but then it really shouldn't give you any trouble whatsoever from my experience. Also keep in mind that most of the modern smartphone models nowadays, they are waterproof to a certain degree. So even if you do get a little bit of water inside the housing, it will most likely not destroy your smartphone completely. And if you're too afraid of taking your smartphone underwater in such a housing, you can always consider using your older backup smartphone, if you have one like that, and use that as your phone to take it underwater for filming and photography, and not your main phone that you might be relying on a little more. And to finish off the list here, last but not least, I want to mention that the Dive C-Touch 4 Max underwater smartphone housing doesn't come with a transportation box in the standard package. So that's something that I don't really like, because I do like having my underwater housing protected, especially when I'm traveling or even just for storage. The good news is that you can get their box that they have for sale, but it's available separately. You need to buy it separately, and it will hold your smartphone housing as well as some accessories and make it a lot easier to travel with that transportation box. If you're thinking about getting the Dive Fork Sea Touch 4 Max, I highly recommend you also get that transportation box for storage as well as for transporting your smartphone housing to your travel destination. The Sea Life Sport Diver underwater smartphone housing does come with a couple of negatives as well. First and foremost, I think it is that it needs to be used with a third-party app to be able to use the smartphone camera inside the housing. This means that most likely you won't be able to make full use of all the camera functions that your smartphone camera offers, because the app most likely won't have access to all of the camera functions. Secondly, you will need to have some batteries for the housing to work, because the housing needs to have a Bluetooth connection, established Bluetooth connection to your smartphone to connect the app to the housing, and so you can use the housing to control the camera inside your smartphone. It's not something dramatic, but you need to keep that in mind, especially if you're on locations that are kind of far away. You need to make sure that you have plenty of spare batteries with you, and you don't only have to monitor the battery level of your smartphone, but you also need to monitor the battery level of your housing, so that you can just avoid the risk of running low or out of battery on either of those two devices while you're underwater, which would result in you not being able to take any more photos or videos. Another negative that I find is that you do need to carry with you a manual vacuum pump to be able to create that vacuum inside the smartphone housing. Last but not least, the price is something that I consider to be a negative, simply compared to the Dive Fork housing, which comes in at $199 US. The Sea Life Sport Diver underwater smartphone housing will cost you around $299. So it's a fair bit more expensive than the other housing. And last but not least, let's talk about the cons, the negatives on the Hot Dive H2 Pro, which obviously also has a couple. Same as with the Sea Life Sport Diver underwater smartphone housing, the Hot Dive H2 Pro also needs a third-party app to be able to use your smartphone's camera inside that housing. Also, it does need batteries, obviously, to establish that Bluetooth connection to the smartphone, so you can then use the smartphone's camera through the buttons on the housing. In addition to using the battery for that connection, it also uses the battery to establish the vacuum at the beginning before you go for your dive, because you're not manually pumping it, but you're using the battery power to extract that air out of the housing and create that vacuum. So while this is a very convenient way, because you don't need to carry a separate vacuum pump with you, it also means that your battery is gonna drain a little quicker. And down the same line, we also need to mention that the LED light that is integrated, built into the housing, also uses the same battery as you're using for the Bluetooth and for creating the vacuum. So if you're using that LED light frequently on your dives, you will actually notice that your battery will just go much quicker. The battery that is used in the Hot Dive H2 Pro, opposed to the Sea Life Sport Diver smartphone housing, is not a replaceable battery, but it's like a battery pack that can be charged via USB-C, which is actually a nice thought for not using too many sort of disposable batteries and all that sort of stuff. But it also means that if the battery is drained, you cannot just take the old batteries out, pop a new battery in, and go for your next dive. You will have to just put it on charge and wait for a little while for the housing to charge again. It doesn't take too long, but it's still something that you have to take in account. You cannot just come out, exchange batteries and go back into the water. You will have to leave it there for a little while at least to charge the battery pack again using a USB-C connection. One of the biggest things I find as a negative on the Hot Dive H2 Pro is that no matter whether you have a variety of different lenses integrated in your smartphone, like most modern smartphones have 3 or maybe even more lenses, like a standard lens, a wide angle or ultra wide angle lens, and a telephoto lens. So those are the 3 sort of standard main ones that are common in modern smartphones nowadays. Whether you have that or not, with the Hot Dive H2 Pro, you will not be able to access these lenses underwater. You will only have access to your main lens. And that's something that I find to be a very big negative, because it does restrict my creativity and the use of my smartphone underwater quite a bit. Because I do really enjoy using that ultra wide lens every now and then to capture a full like panoramic scene underwater. And I also like to use the telephoto lens so I can capture some decent looking macro shots underwater. And this is all possible with the other 2 housings, but with the Hot Dive H2 Pro, this is not really possible, and I find that to be quite a pity. Lastly, I also want to mention the price here. The Hot Dive H2 Pro will cost you $349. Again, a little more expensive than the Sea Life Sport Diver smartphone underwater housing, and obviously quite a bit more expensive than the Dive Fork Sea Touch 4 Max. Wow, so those were really a few feature-rich and number-rich minutes right there. And if your head is spinning just a little bit right now, don't worry, that's quite normal. My one is spinning a little bit as well. But I just really wanted to give you as much in-depth information about the different types of underwater smartphone housings and their pros and cons, so that you can really make an informed decision which one is the right one for you. Talking about which one is the right one for you, I want to share my conclusion with you as well as to which one I think is the best smartphone housing out on the market nowadays. And you might have guessed it, I would definitely, without any doubt, go for the Dive Fork Sea Touch 4 Max underwater smartphone housing for one specific, very specific reason, which is the touchscreen functionality on that phone. I think this is a huge game changer, making it completely a one-of-its-kind underwater smartphone housing, giving you the capability of using all the functions of your smartphone even while being underwater by being able to use the touch screen. And it doesn't matter whether you're diving in tropical warm water and using your bare hands, or you're diving regularly in cold water and you need a dry suit and dry gloves, you'll still be able to work the touch screen just as well as with your bare hands. And that's something really, really cool. Also, for the price, as we've seen before, it is the cheapest one out of all the ones that we've looked at here today. It's probably not the cheapest one that you can find out on the market. There is cheaper versions of smartphone housings, but I do think that it is very, very fairly priced and giving you really a fantastic value for money. Talking about fair pricing, I also want to mention that Dive Fork is holding a Black Friday sale, starting from the 24th and lasting to the 26th of November. During that sales period, you will get an extra 20% off on all the products that you buy directly from their website. I'll put a link down in the video description below. The coupon code is integrated in that link, so as soon as you click on that link and get onto the website, whatever you pick from their products and put it into your shopping cart, your 20% will be automatically taken off the total amount of your purchase. So if you're thinking about getting yourself a smartphone housing for your smartphone, this might be your chance during the Black Friday sales period right there. And this brings our today's video to an end. Thank you so much, guys, for your time and for watching. I hope you got a lot of information out of this video, and I was able to help you a little bit with deciding which underwater smartphone housing is the right one for you and how they differ from one another. If this video was useful, if you got something out of it, as always, please do hit that like button. You know it means a lot to me, and also consider subscribing to the channel so you're not missing out on any future content that will be uploaded here. Also, if you know about someone who is trying to figure out which underwater smartphone housing they should buy, feel free to share this video with them. It might help them in their decision finding process. Until next time, have a fantastic week, and don't forget to capture and share your underwater adventures. I will see you next week.